It started on a Tuesday. Not even a significant Tuesday. Just like your average, suffocatingly boring Tuesday in Glastonbury, Connecticut. You know the kind of town I'm talking about, right? The kind of place where people literally hire landscapers to measure their grass blades with a ruler to make sure they aren't violating the sacred half-inch maximum height variance. I was just standing in my driveway, holding a mug of lukewarm coffee, wearing sweatpants that I'm pretty sure had a questionable mustard stain on the left knee, just trying to mind my own business. And then, there she was, Brenda. Brenda is the president of the Oakwood Terrace Homeowners Association. And I swear to God, the woman can smell a minor CC&R violation from 3 zip codes away. She was marching up my driveway, her sensible orthopedic sneakers squeaking against the concrete like tiny mice crying for help, clutching this neon pink piece of paper that was practically glowing in the morning sun. I just took a deep breath, like bracing myself for the absolute nonsense that was about to exit her mouth. "David," she said, and she always uses my full name, drawing out the syllables like I'm a child who just tracked mud onto her white carpets. "We have a very serious problem." I took a sip of my coffee, deliberately slow, maintaining unblinking eye contact. "Morning, Brenda. Beautiful day, isn't it? The air smells like fresh-cut grass and impending fines." She didn't even crack a smile, just adjusted her glasses, the kind that hang around her neck on a beaded chain, and pointed a manicured, talon-like finger at the top of my house. "Your roof, David. The new shingles." "Yeah," I said, putting a hand on my hip. "They keep the rain out. Pretty cool invention, honestly. Much better than the blue plastic tarp I had up there since that oak branch decided to kamikaze into my living room last month." "They are the wrong color," she stated, her voice dropping an octave into what I call her official business register. I literally laughed out loud. I couldn't help it. "Brenda, they are gray. The old roof was gray. The new patch is gray. The whole thing is gray. It's the most boring, non-offensive color in the known universe." "They are not just gray, David," she said, shoving the clipboard toward my chest. "According to the Architectural Review Committee's guidelines, which you signed upon purchasing this property, all roofing materials must conform strictly to the approved neighborhood palette. You have installed Dusty Pebble. The only approved gray for Sector 4 of the subdivision is Heritage Gray." I just stared at her. I literally stood there in my driveway for what felt like 10 minutes, trying to process the absolute absurdity of those words. Dusty Pebble, Heritage Gray. Who even comes up with these names? Dusty Pebble sounds like the stage name of a retired arthritic stripper. Heritage Gray sounds like a depression meal from the 1800s. "Brenda, I mean this with all due respect, which is admittedly very little right now, but you cannot be serious. It's gray. I paid a guy named Gary $3,000 cash last week to patch the hole, so raccoons would stop having orgies in my attic insulation, and he used gray shingles. I am not ripping up a perfectly good, watertight roof because it's the wrong flavor of sadness. It disrupts the visual harmony of the cul-de-sac," she said, her upper lip doing that little twitch. The twitch that meant she was about to drop the hammer. "The board had an emergency meeting last night regarding the aesthetic integrity of your property." "An emergency meeting? Really? Over shingles? Mrs. Henderson down the street literally has a garden gnome that looks exactly like Charles Manson, and you guys are holding emergency meetings over my gray roof?" "The gnome is grandfathered in under the 2018 quirky lawn ornament variants," Brenda said, completely deadpan. I'm not even making that up. She literally said quirky lawn ornament variants with a straight face. "Your roof, however, is an unapproved structural modification. Here is your citation." She practically slapped the pink paper against my chest. I took it, glancing at the bold, aggressively capitalized letters. "You are being assessed a fine of $500 for the initial violation," she recited, clasping her hands in front of her like she was delivering a sermon. "And you have exactly 30 days to strip the unapproved Dusty Pebble materials and replace the entire roof, since a patch job is no longer structurally cohesive with Heritage Gray architectural asphalt shingles. If you fail to comply within the 30-day window, the HOA will begin assessing a fine of $100 per day, and we will place a lien on your property." My brain kind of short-circuited for a second. Wait, hold on. Replace the entire roof? The roof that was just inspected and appraised at 15 grand? Because a 10 by 10 patch is Dusty Pebble? "Visual harmony, David," she chirped, turning on her heel. 30 days. Have a blessed morning." I watched her march back down the driveway, her posture so rigid I'm pretty sure she had a yardstick shoved down her sweater vest. I looked down at the citation. $500. 30 days. A $15,000 roof replacement. Over a shade of gray that no normal human eye could even differentiate without a Pantone color book and a magnifying glass. I crumbled the pink paper in my fist. A slow, simmering heat started to build in my chest. It wasn't just anger, it was that deep, righteous indignation that only comes when some petty bureaucrat tries to strong-arm you out of your hard-earned money just to flex their imaginary authority. I looked up at the roof. The dusty pebble honestly looked great. It was functional. It was clean, and it was mine. Right then and there, standing in my mustard-stained sweatpants, I made a vow. I literally promised myself, to the universe, to the raccoons that used to live in my attic, if the Oakwood Terrace HOA board wanted a new roof. Oh, they were going to get a new roof. They were going to get the most spectacularly compliant, maliciously engineered, legally untouchable roof this side of the Mississippi. I stormed back into the house, slamming the front door just hard enough to make the decorative mirrors in the hallway rattle. I tossed the crumpled citation onto the kitchen island and booted up my laptop. I didn't even change out of my sweatpants. I poured another cup of coffee, sat down, and pulled up the PDF of the Oakwood Terrace Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions. If you've never read an HOA CC&R document, let me paint you a picture. It's like reading the terms of service for an Apple update, but written by a passive-aggressive middle school hall monitor who hates joy. It's 75 pages of soul-crushing rules about what kind of petunias you can plant, how long your garbage cans can be visible from the street, 45 minutes max, apparently, and the exact acceptable dimensions of a mailbox flag. I scrolled past the landscaping mandates. I skimmed over the driveway ceiling requirements. I was looking for the architectural guidelines. Section 8, Article 4, Roofing Materials. I started reading, tracing the dense legalese with my finger. All roofing materials utilized within the boundaries of Oakwood Terrace must conform to the approved aesthetic standards established by the Architectural Review Committee. Acceptable materials are strictly limited to the following: traditional asphalt architectural shingles in approved shades only, natural slate tile, treated wood shake. Pritchardgen, I sighed, rubbing my temples. It looked pretty ironclad. Brenda had me dead to rights on the material and color restrictions. But then, right at the bottom of the section, buried under a subclause about flashing and gutter guards, a single sentence caught my eye. I stopped. I blinked. I leaned closer to the screen, reading it again. And then a third time. OR, in accordance with the 2015 State of Connecticut Green Building Initiative, homeowners may utilize a locally sourced, recycled metal composite, provided it meets state fire codes and is structurally sound. I sat back in my chair. A slow, terrifying grin started to spread across my face. Recycled metal composite, locally sourced, State of Connecticut. The HOA had copy-pasted a state-mandated eco-friendly clause into their bylaws back in 2015 to get a tax break on the community center solar panels, and they never bothered to remove it. They explicitly authorized locally sourced, recycled metal composite roofs. They didn't specify color. They didn't specify shape. They didn't specify that it had to look like a normal roof. It just had to be recycled metal, locally sourced in Connecticut and up to fire code. My mind was spinning. Sheet metal, corrugated steel, too easy, too normal. Brenda would just fight me on the aesthetic harmony clause and tie me up in HOA court for years. I needed something bigger. I needed a trump card. I needed something so legally radioactive that the HOA's own lawyers would run screaming in the opposite direction if Brenda even tried to touch it. I picked up my phone and dialed the only guy I knew who could navigate this specific brand of insanity, my buddy Mark. Mark is a lawyer. Not the kind of lawyer who wears slick suits and argues corporate mergers, but the kind of lawyer who works out of a strip mall next to a vape shop, wears novelty ties to court, and lives for exploiting obscure legal technicalities. He answered on the fourth ring. Law offices of Mark Higgins, where your problems become my billable hours. What's up, Dave? Mark, I said, my voice practically vibrating with adrenaline. I need you to tell me everything you know about art law. Specifically, I need to know how to legally classify a roof as a protected piece of art. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him chewing on something crunching. Dave, buddy, it is 9:30 in the morning. Have you been drinking? No, Mark, I'm perfectly sober. Brenda from the HOA just fined me $500 and gave me 30 days to replace 15 grand roof because my shingles are dusty pebble instead of heritage grige. The bylaws say I can use locally sourced, recycled metal. I want to build a new roof, but I need it to be bulletproof. I need to make it so that if Brenda so much as breathes on it, she commits a federal crime. Another pause. Slower chewing this time. Okay, Mark said slowly. I'm listening. You're talking about VARA, the Visual Artists' Rights Act of 1990. VARA? What the hell is VARA? It's federal copyright law, man, Mark explained, the gears clearly starting to turn in his head. It grants certain moral rights to artists who create works of visual art. Specifically, the right to prevent intentional modification, distortion, mutilation, or destruction of a work of recognized stature. If someone destroys a protected piece of art without the artist's permission, they can be sued for massive statutory damages, like up to $150,000 massive. I felt the metaphorical light bulb over my head explode into 1,000,000 watts. So, if I hire an artist to create a recognized piece of art, and that art just happens to be permanently affixed to my roof, the HOA can't touch it, technically? Mark laughed, a sharp barking sound. If the commission is structured correctly, and the artist retains their VARA rights, and the piece is integrated into the property, yeah. If the HOA forces you to tear it down, they are destroying the artist's work. The artist sues the HOA into oblivion. It's a massive legal landmine. Mark, I whispered, pacing back and forth in my kitchen. How exactly does one define recycled metal in the state of Connecticut? Scrap steel, aluminum siding, old car parts. What about expired license plates? I asked. License plates? I mean, they are stamped aluminum. They are recycled by the state. They are literally locally sourced. Yeah, I guess they fit the definition. Mark, I said, a maniacal laugh bubbling up in my throat. I'm going to need you to draft a very specific ironclad artist commission contract, because I am about to buy 8,000 used Connecticut license plates, and I am going to hire a guy to build me a roof. I mean, finding an artist who is willing to treat a suburban roof like the canvas for their next magnum opus isn't exactly something you can just Google. I literally spent the next 3 days scouring local art school message boards and weird underground Facebook groups. I guess I was looking for someone specific, not a landscape painter, not some guy who makes jewelry out of sea glass. I needed someone unhinged, someone who hated authority just as much as I did, but like, in an artistic way. That's how I found Zephyr. His real name was Dylan, but he insisted on going by Zephyr because he said consonants trapped his spiritual energy or something. I met him at this aggressively indie coffee shop downtown, where they serve espresso in hollowed-out gourds. Zephyr was wearing paint-splattered denim overalls with no shirt underneath, and he had this wild, unkempt hair that looked like a bird had tried to build a nest in it and then gave up halfway through. So Dave, Zephyr said, swirling his gourd, you said you have a canvas that challenges the socioeconomic paradigms of suburban conformity? Honestly, yeah, that's exactly what I have, I said, leaning over the table. I have a 1,500 square foot slanted canvas in Oakwood Terrace, and I need you to design a massive, neighborhood-blinding mosaic of a smiling sun. But here's the catch. The medium isn't paint. It's Connecticut license plates. Zephyr literally stopped swirling his gourd. He looked at me, his eyes wide, and I swear I saw a tear form in the corner of his left eye. Industrial upcycling, he whispered, like it was a holy word. Reclaiming the mechanized identity of the state to create an organic symbol of life. I mean, it's brilliant. It's an indictment of the fossil fuel industry masked as residential cheer. Exactly, I lied, nodding solemnly. And the HOA is going to hate it. But I need to commission you formally. Like legally binding registered copyright, full Visual Artists' Rights Act protection. If they try to take it down, they are destroying your registered masterpiece, and you get to sue them for 6 figures. Zephyr slammed his hands on the table, startling a guy next to us who was aggressively typing a screenplay. I'm in. Let's stick it to the beige bourgeoisie. So Mark drafted the contract. It was a masterpiece of legal overkill. It explicitly stated that the Connecticut Sun was a site-specific installation, that its structural integration into my roof was integral to its meaning, and that Zephyr retained all moral rights under VARA. I paid Zephyr a $500 commission fee, which he immediately spent on, I guess, more gourds and some organic hemp seed oil. But having the design and the legal protection was only like 20% of the battle. Now I had to actually acquire the materials and find someone crazy enough to install them. I manage complex production workflows for a living, So I didn't just wing this. I literally went to my home office and booted up my computer. I built out a full 30-day Gantt timeline in Notion to track everything, treating this roof like a high-stakes project launch. I had columns for material sourcing, contractor vetting, legal contingencies, and honestly, a specific tag just for Brenda's inevitable meltdowns. Sourcing the plates was an absolute nightmare. You can't just walk into the DMV and ask for 8,000 expired plates. They look at you like you're building a bomb. I had to hit up every scrap metal yard, junkyard, and auto recycler within a 50-mile radius. I was literally driving around in a rented U-Haul box truck for 4 days, negotiating with guys named Big Sal and Toothless Pete, who chain-smoked cheap cigars and looked at me like I was an alien. What do you even want with 300 pounds of aluminum tags, buddy? This guy at the Bridgeport salvage yard asked me, spitting a glob of something brown onto the dirt. Art project, I said, handing over a stack of 20s. I'm really passionate about infrastructure. By the end of the week, my 2-car garage was completely useless. It was literally overflowing with thousands upon thousands of Connecticut license plates. The classic light blue gradient ones, the old dark blue ones with white text, even a few of the weird specialty ones with whales and lighthouses on them. The smell was unique. It smelled like hot asphalt, rust, and decades of bad traffic on I-95. Then came the hardest part, the contractor. I called 6 different roofing companies. 5 of them hung up on me the second I explained the concept. The general consensus was that I was either clinically insane or trying to pull some kind of insurance fraud. But the 6th call was to a guy named Mike. Mike ran a small, independent crew out of the next town over. When he pulled up to my house for the estimate, his truck rattled so loudly, I thought the engine block was going to fall out onto the pavement. Mike stepped out. He was a solid wall of a man, weathered and tough, looking like he had been inhaling boiling tar fumes since, honestly, 1998. He had a pencil tucked behind his ear and a clipboard that looked like it had been run over by a forklift. "All right, Dave," Mike said, his voice sounding like a cement mixer full of gravel. "Show me this problem you got." I took him around back and pointed up at the perfectly fine dusty pebble roof. Then, I opened the garage door and showed him the literal mountain of license plates. "I need those," I said, pointing to the garage. "Layered and nailed onto that," pointing to the roof, "in a specific pattern resembling a giant sun. And I need it done strictly to state fire and structural codes." Mike just stood there. He didn't blink. He didn't speak. He just slowly took the pencil from behind his ear, pulled a tape measure from his belt, and walked into the garage. He picked up a license plate, turned it over, flexed the metal, and then looked at the roofing nails holding my current shingles. He walked back out, spit into the bushes, and looked at me. "Let me get this straight," Mike grumbled. "You want me to nail 8,000 used Honda Civic tags to your rafters?" "They're aerodynamically stamped aluminum, Mike," I said, trying to sound as professional as possible while standing in front of a junkyard's worth of garbage. "Think of it as a custom, interlocking metal roof system. It's totally eco-friendly." "It's a hazard is what it is," Mike snorted. "You're gonna blind every pilot flying into Bradley International. Plus, the sheer labor of overlapping these so they actually shed water, you're talking custom flashing, weatherproofing membranes, double underlayment. Can you do it?" I asked, cutting to the chase. Mike crossed his arms. "I've been roofing for 25 years. I've laid slate, I've laid copper, I've laid that fake rubber crap they sell at Home Depot. I can make a roof out of stale saltine crackers if you pay me enough. But this is a liability." "I'll sign a waiver," I said immediately, "holding you completely harmless for any aesthetic or HOA-related blowback. I just need it watertight, and I need it to pass a basic structural inspection so they can't force me to tear it down for safety reasons." Mike looked back at the garage, then up at the roof, his brain clearly calculating the sheer level of nonsense he was about to sign up for. He started scribbling furiously on his battered clipboard. "All right," Mike finally said, ripping the top sheet off and handing it to me. "I'll need to strip the current layer to lay down a heavy-duty ice and water shield over the whole deck. Otherwise, this aluminum is going to sweat and rot your plywood. We overlap the plates like cedar shakes, double nail them with galvanized roofing nails, and seal the edges. It's going to be loud, it's going to be annoying, and cash is due up front. And I ain't bailing you out of jail when the cops show up." I looked down at the estimate. He had itemized everything down to the last tube of industrial sealant. I looked at the bottom line. The grand total was exactly $6,700.25, honestly. Considering the sheer magnitude of the headache I was buying, that felt like the bargain of the century. "Mike," I said, shaking his calloused hand. "You're hired. We start Monday." That weekend, I finalized the design with Zephyr. We sat in my living room, surrounded by stacks of license plates, using my Notion workspace to color coordinate the layout. We used the classic light blue plates for the sky background, the older dark blue ones to create contrast lines, and a massive cache of yellow New York and New Jersey plates I had managed to scrounge up to form the giant grinning face of the sun right over my master bedroom. Zephyr even insisted on signing the bottom right corner, right above the gutters, using a series of red dealer plates. "It's about the juxtaposition of state borders," Zephyr explained, waving a piece of pizza around. "The sun shines on all of us, Dave, even the bureaucrats." "Yeah, sure, Dylan, totally," I agreed, checking off the final prep task on my ClickUp board. Just make sure the smile is wide enough to be visible from Brenda's kitchen window. Monday morning rolled around, and the cul-de-sac was dead quiet. The kind of quiet where you can hear sprinklers clicking 3 houses down. Right at 7 a.m., the exact minute the HOA noise ordinance allowed for construction to begin, Mike's rusted-out truck came screeching around the corner, followed by a flatbed carrying a massive dumpster and a crew of 4 guys who looked like they lived on energy drinks and spite. They didn't waste any time. Within 20 minutes, the sound of tearing asphalt and screaming power tools shattered the tranquil suburban morning. My perfectly good dusty pebble shingles were being ruthlessly stripped off and hurled into the dumpster. I was sitting on my front porch, drinking my coffee, literally vibrating with anticipation. I knew it wouldn't take long. Brenda's house was diagonally across the street, and she had an unobstructed view of my property. Sure enough, at 7:45 a.m., her front door flew open. She marched out in her pink silk bathrobe, her hair wrapped in a towel, looking like a furious, sleep-deprived flamingo. She stood at the end of her driveway, staring in absolute horror as Mike's crew hauled the first wheelbarrow full of license plates up the ladder. I just raised my coffee mug to her. She didn't wave back. She just turned around, ran back inside, and slammed the door. I knew exactly what she was doing. She was calling the police. By 9 a.m., the first row of license plates was going down. And let me tell you, when the sun hits fresh, aerodynamically stamped aluminum at an angle, it is blinding. It was like someone had installed a mirror array on my roof. That's when the black and white cruiser rolled slowly down the street, its lights flashing silently. It pulled up right behind Mike's flatbed. I put my mug down. Here we go. The first real test of the sovereign ruling methodology. A cop stepped out of the cruiser. He looked young, maybe late 20s, and he was already squinting aggressively against the glare coming off my roof. He adjusted his utility belt and walked up the driveway, looking between me and the chaotic metallic mosaic currently being hammered into my house. "Morning, officer," I said cheerfully, walking down the porch steps to meet him. "Beautiful day for a roofing project, right?" He stopped, putting a hand up to shield his eyes. "Are you the homeowner, sir?" "I am, Dave. Nice to meet you." "Officer Davis," he replied, pointing a thumb back over his shoulder toward Brenda's house. "Sir, dispatch received a rather frantic call from a neighbor. They claimed you were running an illegal scrapyard and hoarding stolen vehicle parts on your roof, causing a public disturbance." I literally burst out laughing. "Stolen vehicle parts?" Honestly, Brenda has quite the imagination. "No, Officer Davis, I assure you, everything here is completely above board." I pulled a thick folder from my back pocket. "I am nothing if not prepared. What you are looking at is a commissioned art installation utilizing locally sourced recycled metal. It is perfectly up to code, and I have all the receipts from the state-authorized scrap dealers right here to prove ownership of the materials." Officer Davis took the folder, looking incredibly confused. He flipped through the receipts, then looked back up at the roof. Mike was currently straddling the ridgeline, violently hammering a 2012 Subaru Outback plate into place with a pneumatic nail gun. "Sir," Officer Davis started, his voice trailing off as he watched a ray of light violently reflect off a vanity plate that read LUV2 Fish, hitting him square in the retina. He blinked hard. "Is that an '89 commercial truck plate up there?" "Sure is," I smiled. "Adds texture." The artist felt it was very important for the composition of the sun's left eye. Officer Davis sighed. It was the deep, weary sigh of a man who realized he did not get paid enough to deal with suburban warfare. He looked over at Brenda's house. She was currently standing in her living room window, pressing her face against the glass like a gargoyle, holding her phone to her ear. "Sir, you have to admit, this is highly unusual. The glare alone." "There's no town ordinance against glare, officer," I pointed out politely. I checked, and the HOA bylaws explicitly permit the use of locally sourced, recycled metal composite roofing. I'm just adhering to the community's green building initiatives. Davis handed the folder back to me. He looked at the half-finished sun, then at Brenda's window, and finally back at me. A tiny, almost imperceptible smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Well, Dave," he said, tapping his radio, "I don't see any stolen cars. And I don't enforce HOA bylaws. This is a civil issue." He turned to walk back to his cruiser, pausing at the door. "Have a nice day. Try not to blind any low-flying aircraft." "I'll do my best, officer," I called out. I watched him drive away, and I swear I could hear Brenda screaming from across the street. The first hurdle was cleared. The cops were useless to her. The roof was going up, and there was absolutely nothing she could do to stop the physical construction. For the next 3 days, my house was the main attraction of Glastonbury. Cars would slowly roll past, drivers hanging out their windows to take pictures. Teenagers were making TikToks on my front lawn. The local mail carrier literally stopped, took off his hat, and just stared for a solid 2 minutes before laughing and driving off. Mike and his crew worked like machines. I have to hand it to them. Despite thinking I was crazy, their craftsmanship was impeccable. The plates were perfectly layered, tightly sealed, and meticulously arranged according to Zephyr's color-coded Notion layout. By Thursday afternoon, the final red dealer plate was nailed into the bottom corner. The Connecticut sun was complete. It was the most gloriously, offensively hideous thing I had ever seen. It spanned the entire front slope of my house, a massive, grinning, yellow and blue face made entirely of rusted, sun-baked metal, staring directly at Brenda's front door with dead, aluminum eyes. It didn't just clash with the neighborhood's aesthetic. It grabbed the aesthetic by the throat and threw it into a wood chipper. I paid Mike the final installment of the $6,711.25 fen. He packed up his tools, looked at the roof one last time, and shook his head. "Dave," he said, getting into his truck, "you are a sick man. Call me if it leaks. But don't call me when they burn your house down." I was just admiring the gleaming monstrosity when I heard the squeak of orthopedic sneakers behind me. I turned around. Brenda was marching up my driveway. But she wasn't alone. She had 2 other board members with her, Gary, a guy who exclusively wore golf polos, and Susan, a woman who looked permanently terrified. Brenda wasn't holding a pink slip this time. She was holding a thick manila envelope, and she looked like she was ready to commit murder. "David," she practically hissed, stopping 10 feet away, refusing to even look up at the roof. This terrorism ends today." "Terrorism?" I gasped, clutching my pearls metaphorically. "Brenda's, it's an eco-friendly architectural choice. Did you see the smile? Zephyr really captured a sense of joy, don't you think?" "Do not play games with me," she snapped, shoving the manila envelope into my chest so hard it bruised. "This is an emergency cease and desist order drafted by the HOA's legal counsel. You are in egregious violation of Section 8, Article 4 regarding aesthetic harmony. You have 48 hours to remove this scrapyard from your roof, or we are imposing an immediate $10,000 fine, and we will hire our own contractors to rip it down at your expense." I looked at the envelope. I didn't even open it. I just smiled. This was it. The trap was officially sprung. "You're going to hire contractors to rip it down?" I asked, making sure my voice was loud enough for Gary and Susan to hear. "Yes," Brenda said, crossing her arms triumphantly. "We have the authority to remediate unapproved structural modifications to protect property values." "Okay," I said, slowly reaching into my back pocket. I pulled out a single neatly folded piece of paper. It wasn't an HOA rulebook. It wasn't a town ordinance. It was a copy of the federally registered VARA commission contract, signed by me, signed by Zephyr, and notarized. Brenda said, my voice dropping the friendly, snarky tone, "I'm not going to argue with you about HOA rules. Because HOA rules no longer apply to my roof." I handed her the paper. She snatched it, her eyes darting over the legal jargon. Gary leaned over to look. "What is this?" she demanded. "That is a federal copyright protection document," I explained calmly, crossing my arms. "Specifically, under the Visual Artist Rights Act of 1990. You see, Brenda, that isn't a roof anymore. That is a registered, protected, site-specific piece of visual art, officially titled The Connecticut Sun. and the artist, Zephyr, retains full moral rights to its integrity. Brenda looked up, her face draining of color. I don't care what you call it, it's coming down. If you touch it, I said, taking a step forward. If you or any contractor you hire removes a single license plate from my property without the artist's express written consent, you are committing the federal offense of mutilating a recognized work of art. And Zephyr's lawyer, who is very aggressive, by the way, will immediately sue the Oakwood Terrace HOA in federal court for up to $150,000 in statutory damages, plus attorney's fees. Silence fell over the driveway. You could hear a pin drop, or, more accurately, you could hear the wind whistling gently through a loose 1994 Ford Taurus plate near the chimney. You're bluffing, Brenda whispered, but her hands were shaking. I'm really not, I said. Oh, and by the way, I CC'd the town's building inspector on all of this. He confirmed this morning that the interlocking aluminum plates technically meet the state's recycled metal roof fire code, which is explicitly allowed in your own bylaws. So, structurally, it's legal. Aesthetically, it's federally protected art. I leaned in just a little bit closer. So, Brenda, if you want to authorize a teardown, go right ahead. But I'd suggest you check the HOA reserve funds first to make sure you have a spare $150,000 lying around. Because I promise you, I will ruin this board. Gary, the guy in the golf polo, suddenly looked very pale. He grabbed Brenda's arm. Brenda, he muttered, we need to call the lawyer now. But the visual harmony, Brenda stammered, staring at the contract like it was a live grenade. Have a great afternoon, guys, I said, turning my back on them and walking up the porch steps. I've got some emails to catch up on. I mean, I knew they were going to panic, but I literally didn't expect the level of absolute, unadulterated chaos that followed. For the next 48 hours, the neighborhood was like a war zone of passive aggression. I saw Brenda furiously pacing in her front window, a phone permanently glued to her ear. Gary, the golf polo guy, drove past my house like 12 times in one afternoon, just staring up at the roof with this look of profound existential dread. I guess reality was finally setting in. They couldn't just bully me into submission with pink slips anymore. They were playing in the big leagues now, and they didn't even know the rules. On Saturday evening, the flyers went out. Stuffed into every single mailbox in Oakwood Terrace was a brightly colored, extremely urgent notice for a mandatory emergency board meeting regarding the immediate aesthetic crisis at Property 442. Honestly, I couldn't wait. I literally ironed a shirt for this. The Oakwood Terrace Community Center is this tragically beige building that smells perpetually like chlorine from the adjacent pool and stale decaf coffee. When I walked in at exactly 6:55 p.m., the place was packed. I'm talking standing room only. Every folding chair was taken by neighbors who looked like they were either ready to form a lynch mob or brought popcorn to watch the show. I took a spot standing against the back wall, leaning casually, just taking it all in. At the front of the room, sitting behind a folding table that was draped in a terribly wrinkled green tablecloth, was the board. Brenda was in the center, looking like she had aged 10 years since Tuesday. Her jaw was clenched so tight I thought her teeth were going to shatter. To her left was Gary, aggressively clicking a pen, and Susan, who just looked like she wanted to evaporate. But it was the guy sitting to Brenda's right that let me know I had already won. He was a guy in a sharply tailored, expensive-looking gray suit, nervously shuffling a stack of papers and wiping sweat from his receding hairline. That was Richard, the HOA's retained legal counsel. At exactly 7:00 p.m., Brenda slammed a little wooden gavel onto the table. "Order!" she barked into a microphone that immediately fed back, causing half the room to wince. This emergency meeting of the Oakwood Terrace Homeowners Association is now in session. We are here to address the abomination that has been illegally erected on Dave's property. She literally pointed a finger directly at me. Half the room turned around in their folding chairs to stare. I just offered a little two-finger wave and a friendly smile. The board has reviewed the situation, Brenda continued, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. And despite Mr. David's attempt to circumvent our community guidelines with fraudulent legal paperwork, we are prepared to authorize the immediate hiring of an external contracting firm to tear down the unapproved scrap metal and restore the visual harmony of our neighborhood. A few people clapped, mostly the elderly folks who thought the sun was some kind of gang symbol. So, Brenda said, turning triumphantly to the lawyer. Richard, if you would please explain the timeline for the injunction so we can get this eyesore removed by Monday. Richard leaned into the microphone. He looked at Brenda, then looked out at the crowd, and finally looked directly at me. He swallowed hard. Actually, Brenda, Richard said, his voice dropping into that calm, measured tone that lawyers use when they are trying to stop their clients from walking directly into a buzzsaw. We will not be seeking an injunction, nor will we be hiring contractors to alter the roof. The room went dead silent. Brenda's head snapped toward him so fast I thought she might give herself whiplash. "Excuse me?" she hissed, forgetting the microphone was still picking up every word. "Richard, we discussed this. It violates the color palette. It's an unapproved modification." "I mean, technically, it's not unapproved," Richard said, rubbing his forehead. Section 8. Article 4 of your own bylaws explicitly permits locally sourced recycled metal composites. Dave sourced recycled aluminum plates within state lines. It passed the town fire inspection this morning. Structurally, it is completely compliant. "I don't care about the structure," Brenda yelled, slamming her hands on the table. "It's a giant, hideous yellow and blue metal face. It ruins the aesthetic harmony. We have the power to enforce visual standards." "Tell them we can tear it down." Richard sighed, a deep, heavy sigh of a man who bills $400 an hour and still doesn't feel adequately compensated. He pulled my VARA contract out of his stack of papers and held it up. "Brenda, if we touch that roof, the Oakwood Terrace HOA will be sued in federal court, and we will lose." Horrifically, whispers erupted across the room. Brenda looked like she was going to pass out. "What are you talking about? It's our neighborhood." "It's federal copyright law, Brenda," Richard explained to the entire room, leaning into the mic. "Dave didn't just build a roof. He commissioned an artist to create a site-specific installation. It is protected under the Visual Artist Rights Act. If the HOA forces the destruction or alteration of that roof, you are legally mutilating a registered work of art. The artist, who I have already spoken to, by the way, and who seems incredibly eager to go to court, is entitled to statutory damages up to $150,000. "It's garbage," Gary yelled into his own mic. "It's literal license plates. The federal government doesn't care if it's license plates or Michelangelo's marble." Richard shot back, finally losing his patience. "Art is subjective, the law is not. If you order contractors onto his property to remove that installation, you are exposing this HOA to a lawsuit that will immediately bankrupt the Community Reserve Fund. We will not be able to afford landscaping, pool maintenance, or snow removal for the next 5 years. Every single homeowner in this room will be hit with a massive special assessment to cover the legal damages." The whispers in the room instantly turned into an uproar. "You want to see neighbors turn on an HOA board? Tell them their monthly dues are going to triple because the president doesn't like the color of someone's roof." "Brenda, are you insane?" a guy in the third row shouted. "Leave his damn roof alone. I'm not paying a $10,000 assessment for your color palette." "Yeah," a woman near the back chimed in. "Honestly, the sun is kind of cute. My kids like it." Brenda was hyperventilating. She looked wildly around the room, the mutiny happening right in front of her eyes. She grabbed the gavel and banged it frantically. "Order! Order! We cannot let one homeowner hold us hostage with a technicality." "It's not a technicality, Brenda. It's the United States Code," Richard said, packing his papers into his briefcase. "My official legal advice is that you stand down. In fact, if the board votes to proceed with the teardown, I will be resigning as your counsel immediately because I refuse to be part of a federal copyright violation." Checkmate. Brenda sat there, completely frozen. The entire room was yelling at her to drop it. Gary was practically hiding under the table. Susan looked like she was praying. I literally just stood in the back, arms crossed, letting the absolute beauty of the moment wash over me. I didn't even have to say a single word. I had weaponized their own lawyer against them. "Fine," Brenda choked out, her voice barely a whisper. She looked like she had swallowed a lemon whole. The board withdraws the citation. The property is granted a permanent aesthetic variance." She didn't even officially adjourn the meeting. She just stood up, grabbed her purse, and power walked out the side door, leaving the green tablecloth and the angry crowd behind. I guess you could say she finally saw the light. The next morning was a Sunday. I woke up late, put on some comfortable sweatpants, no mustard stains this time, and brewed a fresh pot of coffee. I walked out onto my front porch and sat down in my favorite Adirondack chair. It was a beautiful, clear Connecticut morning. The sun was just starting to rise over the trees, hitting my roof at the perfect calculated angle. I looked up. The Connecticut sun was positively glowing. The yellow New York plates shone like actual gold, and the blue background plates shimmered in the morning light. It was loud, it was obnoxious, and it was a permanent, legally protected monument to malicious compliance. I looked across the street. Brenda's front window was completely covered by heavy, blackout curtains. I guess the glare from the 2012 Subaru Outback plate was just a little too intense for her morning tea. I took a slow, deep sip of my coffee, feeling the warm mug in my hands. Honestly, I've never tasted a better cup of coffee in my entire life. This is what I mean when I talk about the game. They build these little empires out of rulebooks and bylaws, thinking they can control every aspect of your life because you signed a piece of paper. But the thing about rulebooks is, they go both ways. You just have to be willing to read further than they do. When petty tyrants try to use the rules against you, you don't break the rules. You don't throw a tantrum. You just find a bigger, heavier book of rules and you drop it directly on their heads. So, to all of you out there dealing with your own Brendas, your own absurd citations, and your own power-tripping boards, take notes, find your leverage, embrace the technicalities, and most importantly, never, ever let them tell you what color your roof has to be. Until next time, keep your roofs shiny and your compliance malicious. Have fun with this one. It's a ride.